franktalks.com.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank because I have to be. Today we're doing a very special show. About 2 weeks ago, I attended the funeral of the mother of one of my longtime friends. She died of cancer. And it really touched me, having lost my father just a few years ago as well. My father did not die of cancer, but when you deal with loss, it's something that can affect you, things you never get over. While I was looking for people to interview for my radio show, I came across an author who had written a book on how to beat cancer. And I thought, how appropriate for the way that I've been feeling. And when I read up on this author, when I looked at the preview of his book, what an amazing telling of his story. He took what was potentially a horrible situation, survived it, and now has made it his life's work to go out there and help other people. And for that, I absolutely respect this man. His name is Robert Marckini. He is a cancer survivor and author of the book, You Can Beat Prostate Cancer. Now, at the present time, this is the number 3 top-selling book on Lulu.com. Marckini now runs an international prostate cancer support group called Brotherhood of the Balloon, and we're going to be talking about that later in the show. He also explains the treatment for cancer called Proton Beam Therapy, and I really want to get as much information about this as possible. Welcome to Frank Talks, Mr. Robert Marckini.
Thank you very much, Frank. It's great to be here.
All right. Now, standard question on this show. Let's start off where you were born. And tell me, with whatever you feel comfortable sharing, because I know a lot of this is your private story, tell me things that have happened along the way in your upbringing, in your life, that brought you to an awareness about cancer.
Well, I was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Never really traveled too far from there. I've lived pretty much within about a 100-mile radius of Cambridge, Massachusetts. My father was a police officer there. My mother was a telephone operator, and we're a close-knit family. I had a brother. I have a brother and 2 sisters. And went to grammar school, high school, and college, all in the Boston area. And worked in chemical manufacturing for most of my career. Ended my career as a senior officer in a Fortune 500 company. And have had a wonderful life, married, 2 daughters. Along the way, I was introduced to the disease of cancer, as actually from a very young child. I had aunts and uncles that had been diagnosed with the disease. Both my parents were very worried about the disease, and when I was a child, it was often referred to as the big C. They didn't even use the term cancer in my family. But I was aware of it. I did have some concerns. I had some fears about it because of relatives that had the disease. And of course, as you probably know, I had an older brother who was diagnosed with prostate cancer. My father was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and both my parents had colon cancer. So it's a disease that has certainly impacted our family.
So this runs in your family. Like, we're talking here, uncles, aunts, runs the gamut here.
Mm-hmm.
And even back then, growing up in this environment, were you then very mindful of the fact that you might one day be susceptible to cancer as well? And if so, did you take any precautions?
I actually didn't think much about it, and I don't think most people do. Even though there's cancer in your family, I didn't pay much attention to the genetic component. I certainly didn't know then what I know now. So it wasn't something that really crossed my mind very much. Probably not until my older brother was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and that's when it really hit home.
I remember reading part of your book where you talk about how this older brother of yours that really was one of the patriarchs getting prostate cancer and suffering, and how that affected you. makes me relate to when I was taking care of my father for the last 8 years of his life, going through the same type of emotions. And from the time that happened with your brother to the time that you were diagnosed with cancer, was it along the lines of, did you come across any of the symptoms in yourself that made you go get checked, or what was the connection there?
Well, my brother was around 61 years old when he was diagnosed, and he had early stage prostate cancer, and he did what most people do. He went to his urologist. He asked his urologist his advice, and his urologist suggested surgery, radical prostatectomy. And I actually drove my brother and his wife to the hospital. And what I saw that day, I will never forget, because he was the picture of health when he walked in the door. And then 4 hours later, when I was with him in the recovery room, he looked like he was near death. He had tubes and drains and catheters, and looked very gray, and oxygen mask on his face, and sleeves on his legs, pumping air to prevent blood clots and so on. And that image is indelibly etched in my mind, and I remember making a promise to myself at the time that if I'm ever diagnosed with this disease, I'm going to try to find something better than surgery for prostate cancer. And now, at that time, my PSA was rising, and we can talk about PSA later if you'd like. Mm-hmm. But that was rising, which indicated that I was at risk. And so I was, let's say, sensitive to the fact that I could be next, and that's when it began to become a little bit more in the forefront of my mind.
You know, when you talked about seeing your brother that way, it reminds me of how when my father went in for open heart surgery, and he came out of that operation in exactly the same way you described, tubes and whatnot. And it's not something anyone ever forgets. You know, when you said that, you know, you want to find something other than surgery, I'm right there with you. So, for the benefit of our listeners, I'd really like to get some of the basic facts here. Let's talk about what is the prostate, where is it located, what is its function, just so that people who are listening, they may be interested in cancer, they may be interested in learning about cancer, but they may not necessarily know what a prostate is, so if we could cover that.
Sure. The interesting thing is, of all the parts of the anatomy, I think less seems to be known about the prostate than probably any other part of the body. I speak to groups quite regularly nowadays, and I'll often start off my talk by asking people, how many people in this room have a prostate? And it's amazing what you see. You know, if there happen to be a lot of young men in the audience, very few hands go up. Certainly, as they grow older, they become much more aware of this gland. And occasionally, if it's a mixed group, one or two women will raise their hands, and that tells you a little bit about what's known about this. The gland itself, the prostate, is typically about the size of a walnut in the average male. It's a gland that's part of the reproductive system, and its function, it's located, by the way, just below the bladder, and the urethra runs right through the middle of it. And its function is to produce the fluid that activates the sperm and propels it out of the body. So it represents the bulk of the fluid in the ejaculate of a male.
My next question to you, is there anything you can do to prevent prostate cancer?
Well, yes, as a matter of fact. No one seems to know for sure what is the cause of prostate cancer, but we do know that, for example, there is a genetic component. If you live in North America, chances are 1 in 6 you will be diagnosed in your lifetime with prostate cancer. Northwestern Europeans are in about the same category, yet Asians and Hispanics tend to have a lower incidence of prostate cancer. African Americans are probably twice as likely or twice as much at risk. So there is a genetic component that you have to pay attention to. But in addition to that, there are diet and lifestyle issues. Men who smoke cigarettes are much more likely to be diagnosed with prostate cancer. Men who have a diet that's high in red meat and animal fats, milk and dairy products, have a higher incidence of prostate cancer. Men with higher testosterone levels, men with BPH or enlarged prostates tend to have a higher incidence. Obesity is a major factor. Maintaining proper body weight is a very important issue when it comes to preventing cancers of all types, but in particular prostate cancer. And sedentary men are also more prone to prostate cancer. So all the things that are good for your general health, maintaining proper body weight, eating a healthy diet, fruits, vegetables, reducing your intake of red meats and animal fats, all of those things are important components in preventing prostate cancer. And of course, choosing different parents would also help quite a bit.
If only. All right. Next question. How do you detect prostate cancer?
Good question. And the answer is there are two basic tests that help determine whether someone has prostate cancer or not. In the old days, there was just one, and the doctors 25 years ago would wait for symptoms to start to show, pain in the pelvic region, blood in the urine, and so on and so forth. And they would do something called a digital rectal exam, where they put on a rubber glove and lubricate the index finger with KY jelly, and then insert it in the rectum and feel the prostate, which is right next to the lower rectum, and they would feel for lumps and ridges and abnormalities. Generally speaking, when you reach the point where you've got lumps in the prostate that represent prostate cancer, it's a more advanced prostate cancer. So that's a test that's done, but perhaps the more important test nowadays for early detection is a test called PSA test, prostate-specific antigen. And PSA is a protein that it comes from only two places in the world. It comes from a functioning prostate, and it comes from prostate cancer. So they'll monitor the level of PSA in your blood by drawing a vial of blood once a year. Generally, a man over 50 years old should be doing this, and over 40 if you're in a high-risk group. And they look for PSA, and the normal range for PSA is 0 to 4. And the units are nanograms per milliliter. A nanogram is a millionth of a gram, and a milliliter is a thousandth of a liter. So we're talking extremely tiny quantities. So they look for the normal range, 0 to 4. But nowadays, they're looking for something beyond that. They're looking for what they call PSA velocity. So if your PSA, even within the normal range, is rising rapidly, and by that I mean 0.75 of a point per year, then that's a red flag, and that means that you want to pay more attention, possibly have a biopsy. But it's the combination of those two tests, the digital rectal exam, DRE, and the PSA test, that help doctors determine whether there is the likelihood of prostate cancer. And if either of those tests give them a positive signal, that's when they do a biopsy, and they remove a number of core samples and then examine them under a microscope to determine if you have prostate cancer.
Now, you mentioned men over 50 should be getting a test once a year, and men over 40 if they're in a high-risk group.
Mm-hmm.
In your experience with all the different patients that you've met, have you met any younger men in their 20s and 30s who have had prostate cancer?
Yes. Matter of fact, men are being diagnosed at earlier and earlier ages nowadays, and that's good news. Because with any disease, particularly with cancer, and especially with prostate cancer, if you catch it early, you have multiple alternatives, and there's no reason in the world why you can't destroy the disease and maintain quality of life. But catching it early is key. And in my group, I now have close to 5,000 members in my group from all 50 U.S. states and 28 countries. We have probably 300 or 400 men in their 40s in our group, and we have 3 men who are in their 30s, including one who is 33 years old. So it is a disease that is affecting younger men, and the good news is people are paying more attention to it.
Now, I'd like to take the interview into a slightly different direction.
Mm-hmm.
I want you to share with me, if you can, the procedure of research you took to learn about prostate cancer. Specifically, according to your book, you went to a number of doctors and got a lot of conflicting opinions, and then you went to cancer patients, and you talked to them. So, if you could just give me a little bit of a synopsis here, from the time you were told that you had prostate cancer, how you reacted to it, and then your procedure in getting the research up to interviewing cancer patients.
Mm-hmm. Well, the date was August 10th, 2000, and there are some dates that you never forget, and that certainly is one that I will always remember. And I, at the time, thought it was the lowest point in my life. And, of course, you start to think about your mortality. I was 57 years old at the time, and my younger daughter was engaged to be married, and I'm having thoughts of, will I be able to walk her down the aisle? Will I ever see my grandchildren? And all these crazy things go through your mind. But after getting over the shock of the diagnosis, I began my research. I refer to myself, I believe I mentioned this in the book, I refer to myself as a recovering engineer. And as such, I'm comfortable wallowing in technical detail. So I went after this the way I think many people do. They first meet with their doctor, and then they start meeting with physicians that represent other treatment modalities, radiation, surgery, cryotherapy, and on and on and on. And then I started reading books. I purchased every book I could find on the subject, and there are many. Started reading magazine articles, newspaper articles, researched the internet. And what I discovered, to my dismay, was the more research I did, the more confused I became. And that included the physicians that I talked with, because what I discovered when I met with a urologist who was fundamentally a surgeon was that I was the perfect candidate for surgery. And then I met with a radiation oncologist, and I was told I was the poster boy for external beam radiation. And the brachytherapist who did seed implantation told me that seeds were designed for me, and same thing with the cryotherapist that does liquid nitrogen treatment. So the more doctors I spoke with, the more confused I became. How could I be the perfect candidate for all those different treatments? And they are so different. And one of the things that I did in my career was to, one of my responsibilities as part of my responsibility for worldwide operations for a major chemical company was purchasing and materials management. And I used to instruct my people to make sure that before we buy a product or service, that we talk with customers who have been purchasing this product or service. And I decided to apply the same process to my research. And I started interviewing former patients. Finding former patients was very difficult at first. It wasn't hard to find former surgery patients because they were all around me. Although when I asked physicians to speak with their patients, they were resistant to allow me to do that. Now, this was before patient confidentiality laws, HIPAA regulations were in place. Many of the doctors would say, why do you need to talk with my patients? I can answer all your questions. And my response was, well, no, you can't. You can't tell me how you feel today. You can't tell me about your side effects today, sexual function, urinary incontinence, and so on. And you can't tell me if you'd make the same decision all over again. So I just set out to find former patients. And once I found one, I could find two more, because a surgery patient or an external beam radiation patient always knew someone else. And when I found that other person, I could find two more. So I interviewed literally hundreds of patients that represented each of the major treatment modalities. And I must say, and I write about this in my book, that's where my education began. That's where I learned most about the treatment options, and that's what helped me most in making my own treatment decision.
All right. Before we continue on with your journey, there is a question I have to ask you, just based on the process of your research. Has your faith or trust in the medical community been challenged, given that going through this process, you had a number of doctors who are supposed to be experts in their field, who are supposed to be giving you the best information with your best interests in mind. Do you have a hard time trusting doctors now? Because in listening to your story, I'm less likely to trust a doctor right now, and I'd rather go talk to the patients for anything I ever get diagnosed.
It's a great question, Frank. And I think the answer that I would give you is that I look upon doctors differently today than I did in the past. I wouldn't say that I don't trust them, but what I've learned is, I grew up believing that, doctors were the closest thing to God, that once somebody achieved that level in their profession, that they had all the answers and they knew what was best for me as a patient. And I learned that that's not the case. What I've learned is that doctors are human beings, as I am. They have faults as I do. They make mistakes as I do. And I learned that doctors in certain professions who have specialties tend to be somewhat myopic about their profession and their specialty. And I think many of them, if not most of them, honestly believe that if they are surgeons, then what they have to offer is in the best interest of their patients. Well, there happen to be radiation oncologists who deliver radiation to destroy cancers, and they tend to believe that their treatment is the best for their patients, and so on. And what I learned from that experience is that the doctor doesn't necessarily know what's best for you. And if you're going to make an informed decision, you make that decision on the basis of all of the data that you take in. And that data includes information you get from books, information you get from the internet, information you get from doctors, and information you get from speaking with former patients. So, yes, I do look upon doctors differently than in the past. I believe most of them are acting in my best interest, but I don't believe that any one of them can make the decision for me. I think it's up to me to make that decision.
And with that answer, we're going to go to our first commercial break. You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. We'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the program Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Frank brings good news to the older seducer, to women they possess higher value. Frank's lecture reviews the stigmas associated with older men dating younger women and their solutions. Key emotional needs for both women and men in the age difference, methods of approaching younger women, and several answers to questions posed by older members of the audience. He also very much covered marriage between an older man and a younger woman. When dealing with a little girl inside, a man must be able to distinguish those women who wish to compensate losses in a father figure from those who are seeking and capable of an authentic relationship. Frank adds advice on where you can meet younger women, as well as dealing with the competition. Life gets better. All in all, a confidence-refreshing lecture for men concerned about their erotic viability over the hill. Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Buy this program now at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Everything Out of Her Mouth is a Test, a man's guide to the emotional needs of women. What would your life be like if you knew exactly what to say and do with women? Learn how to handle women's tests by addressing her emotional needs. By this, you create the type of attraction that will make her see you as the one. This book is a guide for men to understand exactly what a woman means when she speaks. Is that worth changing your life forever? Buy this book at franktalks.com now.
Frank Talks is making the world a better place by interviewing people on pleasures and lifestyles in order to inspire and educate listeners like you about the possibilities to lead more interesting and fulfilling lives. Be sure to visit our website at www.franktalks.com for the most up-to-date information and the latest downloads of programs just like the one you are listening to now.
You're listening to Frank Talks, Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank, because I have to be. Today, we're talking with Robert Marckini. He is the author of the book, You Can Beat Prostate Cancer. And in the last segment, we talked about what prostate cancer was, part of Robert's personal journey. And we're going to continue on with some more very serious questions about cancer. Bob, let's look at the different options for someone who has prostate cancer. You've mentioned surgery before, and the surgeon says that surgery is the best, and you mentioned a few other options. What can you tell me?
Well, there are perhaps three major categories for treating prostate cancer, and within each of those categories, there are multiple subcategories. Three major treatment categories are surgery, radiation, and cryoablation. Surgery has to do with removing it. Radiation has to do with destroying it with radio waves or with subatomic particles accelerated to the speed of light. And then the third is cryoablation, which is freezing it. Within those categories, surgery is basically removing it from your body, but you can have that done with open surgery, you can have it done with laparoscopic surgery, you can have that done with robotic laparoscopic surgery. I'm not a fan of surgery of any kind because it's extremely invasive. It's a very complex procedure, and it doesn't cure cancer any better than the other alternatives. And it generally leaves the man with a much poorer quality of life after treatment, especially in the area of impotence and incontinence. With radiation, there's external beam radiation and there's internal radiation. And there are many forms of external beam, which includes conventional X-ray radiation and then advanced forms of X-ray radiation. And one of those is proton beam radiation therapy, and we can talk about that separately. And then there's internal radiation, which is the implantation of radioactive seeds within the prostate. And there are pros and cons to that, and there are quality of life issues connected with all forms of radiation. And then, of course, the third category is liquid nitrogen, freezing the cancer. That generally tends to be a procedure that is relatively new, and it's used more nowadays as a salvage treatment as opposed to a primary treatment. And then in addition to that, there's hormonal therapy, which is generally used as a follow-up for more advanced cancers, and high-intensity focused ultrasound. And another common approach to treating prostate cancer is something called watchful waiting or active surveillance. And then there's chemotherapy and so on. So as you can see, if you're newly diagnosed and you're doing your research and you come across all these major categories and then all these subcategories, making that decision is very difficult. And it's one of the reasons why some people just say, "Doc, tell me what to do." And that's probably the worst thing you could do.
You know, just listening to all of those options, not even understanding half of it, I'm feeling overwhelmed. I can't imagine what someone who's just found out that they have cancer, I can't even imagine what they must be going through, because they're getting saddled with all this information that they have to go through for something that, that's affecting, their ability, their own belief as to whether or not they're even going to live through this.
Well, that's where I was, Frank, and that's one of the primary reasons I wrote my book.
Can we talk a little bit more about proton beam treatment? Because my understanding is that's the one you chose. That's the one you went with. Okay, so let's start off with, what is proton therapy? How does it compare with other treatments? Who turned you onto it? And why did you choose that one? amongst all those other options?
Well, when I was diagnosed in August of 2000, there was only one place in the world where you could be treated with protons, and that was Loma Linda University Medical Center in Southern California. And as you'd probably guess, there was very little information available at that time. And while I was doing my research, I had stacks of information that I had downloaded and printed in my office on each of the other alternatives, and I think I had 3 or 4 pages that I had come across with regard to this proton beam. And what caught my attention when I stumbled on this treatment is the fact that mechanically it destroys cancer the same way conventional radiation destroys cancer. It enters your body, it damages the DNA of the cancer cell, along with the DNA of the healthy cells. But cancer cells cannot repair themselves. So essentially what you're doing is you're programming the cancer cells to die. And over a period of 1 to 3 years after you're treated, all those cancer cells die and they're gone, and you get on with your life. Now, the difference between proton beam radiation and conventional X-ray radiation is fundamentally this. When X-rays enter your body, this is conventional external beam radiation. When X-rays enter your body, they essentially cook everything in the path. It's like a bullet coming into the body where it destroys everything on the way in and then on the way out. Well, with radiation, it radiates everything on the way in. And with conventional radiation, it's at its maximum intensity as it enters your body. It goes through the tumor, and then it passes out of your body. With proton beam radiation, what they do is they take the proton particle, which is it's a subatomic particle, but it's the largest particle in an atom. They strip they strip a proton from hydrogen gas. They put it into a particle accelerator. And in the old days, these things were as large as a city block. And they speed it up by running it around with electromagnets and speed it up to about 3/4 of the speed of light. They run it into vacuum tubes and then through focusing devices, and then they deliver it to your body. Well, these particles, when they enter your body, come in so fast that they tend not to collide with healthy bones, tissue, organs on their way to the tumor. But when they slow to a predetermined speed, they release all their energy right at the tumor volume, and then there's a zero exit dose. So you can imagine the difference between conventional X-ray radiation and proton beam radiation in that one tends to do a lot of collateral damage, depositing radiation on healthy tissue, bones, organs, etc. The other tends to come in and just do damage to the cancer. The analogy I use in my book is it's like the difference between a smart bomb and a cluster bomb. Smart bomb can be delivered right down the chimney of a house to destroy a house, whereas a cluster bomb destroys the whole neighborhood. And when the neighborhood happens to be the part of the male anatomy that's around the prostate, well, that's something you want to pay close attention to.
Something you said there that I didn't know, and that is cancer cells cannot repair themselves.
That's correct.
So if you attack a cancer cell, it's not like it can heal. It's not like it can come back.
That's right.
So are you able to explain to me when they say that, when someone says, oh, the cancer has come back?
Oh, sure. You have to put it in context. If you're talking surgery, as an example, you're talking about the fact that, let's say we're talking surgery for prostate cancer. A lot of people are under the belief that if I have my prostate surgically removed, then my cancer is guaranteed to be cured. And that's not a true statement. And the reason is because even with early-stage prostate cancer, there is some reasonable probability that microscopic prostate cancer cells have escaped the prostate gland and are in the margins or in the prostate bed. That doesn't mean metastasis to different parts of the body. It doesn't have to be in the lymph nodes, whatever. But it can be in the margins, can be in the prostate bed. So if the prostate is removed and these microscopic cells gain a foothold, then you have a recurrence of your cancer. And the same thing can happen with radiation. However, you have the added advantage with radiation of the fact that when they treat you with radiation, they typically treat the prostate, the capsule, the local seminal vesicles, and a margin around it. So if there's cancer in the margins around the prostate, when you're treated with radiation, such as proton beam radiation, they're destroying cancer in the margins as well.
Now, what are the side effects that are associated with proton beam therapy?
Well, with all forms of treatment for prostate cancer, you can expect some probability of side effects. With surgery, the statistics, published statistics, show that roughly 3 out of 4 men are left impotent, and somewhere in the range of 20 to 40% are left incontinent without bladder control. And there are other side effects as well, strictures and rectal damage and so on. With conventional radiation, the incidence of impotence and incontinence is less than with surgery, probably half to 2/3 as many incidents of impotence and incontinence. But with proton beam, it's even significantly better than that. I did a survey of my members about a year ago, and 95% of them reported that the quality of their life was same as or better than before treatment. A very small percentage reported any changes in sexual function, and most of those people that are in that category indicated that erectile dysfunction medications helped them out. And none of our members reported a problem with bladder control. So the difference, I think, is dramatic in terms of quality of life issues after treatment when you choose a treatment that is so specific as proton beam radiation therapy.
Okay, I'm a little confused on something.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like out of the different treatments out there, proton therapy is one of the better ones with the least side effects.
Mm-hmm.
The question I have is, why is this not more popular?
It's a good question, and there are a couple of reasons. One is that in order to deliver protons, you have to build an extremely expensive facility. It costs nowadays roughly $200 million to build a proton treatment center. And you need a footprint, roughly half a city block, 3 stories high. Where I was treated at Loma Linda University Medical Center in California, this facility is buried underground. So you have to go down 3 stories in order to be treated. So it's extremely costly. The other thing is that because the facility is so costly and because it needs a large staff of people to run it, the treatment costs more money. And there is resistance by some insurers to paying for this because they can claim that statistically you're not necessarily curing the disease any better than you're curing disease with some of the other treatment modalities. But what they fail to take into consideration is the quality of life issues after treatment. So if you're a male and you're in your 40s, 50s, and even 60s or 70s, and you have these various treatment options, what price tag do you put on maintaining sexual function and bladder control? And by the way, just to finish up on that, I mentioned to you earlier that 10 years ago when I was treated, there was only one treatment center in the world, and that was Loma Linda University Medical Center in Southern California. They really pioneered this treatment by working with the Fermi Lab in Chicago to build a mini synchrotron, or particle accelerator, that they could put in the basement of the hospital. And then they built all of the other facilities around it. But today, there are 7 treatment centers, proton treatment centers in the United States, Florida, Massachusetts, in addition to California, Florida, Massachusetts, Texas, Indiana, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, University of Pennsylvania just opened one, and Hampton University will soon open one, and there are several others under construction. So despite the cost, and by the way, some opposition by practitioners of competing modalities, these centers are springing up all over the world.
I think that's fantastic news.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a couple more questions here for you before we go to our next commercial break. First question, how are you doing today?
I couldn't be doing better, Frank. The quality of my life is at least as good as it was before treatment, and probably better. One of the things that I learned at Loma Linda, they have an extraordinary make man whole mission there, where they treat you physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And while my wife and I were out there, we learned a lot about diet and nutrition and lifestyle. And I became much more active. I paid much more attention to my diet and lifestyle. So I'm exercising a lot more regularly. My diet is much improved. And, of course, my cancer, there's no trace of cancer in my body. My PSA has been holding at a very, very low level ever since treatment. And I couldn't be happier about it. I never experienced any of the side effects that I feared that I knew could have happened and were likely to happen if I had chosen some of the alternatives.
Now, you started an organization called the Brotherhood of the Balloon.
Yes.
Now, can you tell me about the Brotherhood of the Balloon? Where it got its name, how you got started, why did you set it up?
Well, it's funny because when it started, it was originally going to be an organization, if you will, I use the term loosely, representing 6 men who went through treatment together. We were all scientists and engineers, and we decided that we wanted to stay in touch with each other, partly because we became friends, partly because we also had done a lot of research studying the disease, and we knew that we'd be tracking our PSAs over time, and we wanted to compare notes. And back then, it was almost like the Robin Williams movie, the Dead Poets Society. No one was really going to know that this group that had the funny name Brotherhood of the Balloon was going to be in existence. And the balloon, the reason for the title, Brotherhood of the Balloon, is that for your treatment each day, they used to use a small rectal balloon. They would insert into the rectum and inflate with 4 ounces of water to protect the rectum from radiation damage, and also to push the prostate up against the pelvic bone to immobilize it so it was in the same position every day. So the one thing that we all had in common is we received this balloon during our treatment every single day for 5 days a week for about 8.5 weeks. What I didn't realize was that others had heard about us and asked to participate in this thing. And by the time I left the hospital in December of 2009, we had 19 members. And after that, we established a website, started putting out a monthly newsletter, and more joined, and now we have close to 5,000 members.
Beautiful. Let's talk about your book very quickly before we go to commercial.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you write it? Was this a journal that you converted into a book? Did you decide from the beginning of this process to write the book? What was the motivation? What has been some of your feedback? Where can we get it?
I wrote the book that I wish had been available to me when I was diagnosed 10 years ago. As I mentioned earlier, I was confused, I was losing sleep, I was angry, and the information that I wanted just wasn't available. Books that were written, there are lots of books. If you go to Amazon right now, there are 3,400 books available on prostate cancer. And my book, by the way, ranges between the number 2 and number 4 spot on Amazon. So it's being discovered by lots and lots of people. But I wrote the book that I wish had been available when I was diagnosed. A book that would describe exactly what this disease is from a layman's point of view. A book that would guide people through the diagnosis process. If I knew then what I know now, I would have been diagnosed 3 years before I was diagnosed, number 1. Number 2, I would not have gone through 3 different sets of biopsies. They would have discovered it in the first biopsy. Number 3, I would not have undergone any pain or discomfort during the biopsy, because there are things you can do to mitigate that pain, such as having local anesthesia. But most doctors won't tell you about that because it slows down the process. I also wanted to tell folks in my book about what these alternative treatment options were all about, the real story based on my interviews with patients. What is it like to have surgery? What is it like to have external beam radiation? What is it like to have seeds? What are the side effects? So on and so forth. And I did that. It was not a journal. It was basically sifting through all the research that I did during the first 6 years and putting it into a format that was easily understandable, user-friendly, and so on. And based on the feedback that I've gotten, and I receive dozens and dozens of emails every single week from folks who have told me that my book has changed their lives, and nothing makes me happier than that.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. We'll be back right after this.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the program Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Frank brings good news to the older seducer, to women they possess higher value. Frank's lecture reviews the stigmas associated with older men dating younger women and their solutions. Key emotional needs for both women and men in the age difference. Methods of approaching younger women. And several answers to questions posed by older members of the audience. He also very much covered a marriage between an older man and a younger woman. When dealing with a little girl inside, a man must be able to distinguish those women who wish to compensate losses in a father figure from those who are seeking and capable of an authentic relationship. Frank adds advice on where you can meet younger women, as well as dealing with the competition. Life gets better. All in all, a confidence-refreshing lecture for men concerned about their erotic viability over the hill. Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Buy this program now at franktalks.com.
From Loser to Seducer is the story of Frank B. Kermit. This book marks the triumph of a nice guy over most of his inner demons. This includes going from being a loser to managing 5 lovers at the same time, his first Valentine's date with 2 women at the same time, and getting back the one that got away. Want to learn how you can change your life? Buy this book at franktalks.com.
Honest, frank approaches, trusted professional conduct, timely taboo topics, and the most eclectic ensemble of interview guests ever produced. Listen to Frank Talks to learn about the different sides of the human spirit. Be sure to visit our website at www.franktalks.com for the most up-to-date information and the latest downloads of programs just like the one you're listening to now.
You're listening to Frank Talks Pleasures and Lifestyles. I'm Frank, because I have to be. In studio today, we are talking with author Robert Marckini. He wrote the book, You Can Beat Prostate Cancer, and he has given us a tremendous wealth of knowledge in this episode of Frank Talks. The one thing I really respect about this author is that he took something that put him in a bad place in his life. Not only did he conquer it, he has turned it into his life's mission, found a meaning in his life. And he's out there making the world a better place, something I absolutely respect. Welcome back to Frank Talks, Robert Marckini.
Thank you, Frank.
All right, just some standard questions here so we can wrap up this interview. First question. In the last segment at the very end, you talked about how people are writing to you, telling you that your book has changed their lives and the pleasure that that gives you. What other pleasures do you experience now in your day-to-day lifestyle?
Well, I read a quote a few years ago from Lance Armstrong that at the time didn't make much sense to me, but it certainly does today. He said, "Cancer was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. It gave my life purpose." And I really could have said the same thing. For my entire career, I was making chemicals and doing corporate things and making money and living my life. Then this August 10th, 2000 thing happened, and I was diagnosed with prostate cancer, and my whole life's direction changed. If someone were to have told me 10 years ago that I'd be leading an international prostate cancer support group, writing a book and speaking to groups about prostate cancer. I never would have believed them, but here I am. A lot of folks refer to what I do here as a ministry. Maybe it is in a certain respect. I find myself taking a lot of satisfaction out of helping recently diagnosed men and their families, by the way. I often speak with a fellow on the phone with his wife on the extension, just explaining, what this disease is all about and what it's not all about, and that it's not a death sentence, and so on and so forth. And the feedback that I get from my book, much of it is on the Lula website or on Amazon. It just brings me a lot of joy and comfort. I spent a lot of time on the phone speaking with folks, less than in the past because I was spending upwards of 80 hours a week on the phone, and my wife finally said, I think you need to change direction here. But I still spend a fair amount of time on the Internet responding to emails. I receive probably 100 to 150 a day. I do get to all of them. I'm currently backed up about 400. Because more and more people are being diagnosed and more people are discovering my website or my book. So it's brought me a lot of satisfaction. I never thought my life would take this direction, but it has, and I've had a lot of fun. I've got a lot of satisfaction out of it. My daughter now works with me to take some of the workload, and she's finding the same experience. She spent most of her career in marketing for a high-tech internet company, and now she's working with me, helping me with the second edition of my book, and helping with the website, helping with our member list, which has about 90,000 pieces of data on it, and she's experiencing the same kind of satisfaction and joy that I am. So it's been a wonderful ride, and every day there's something new and more satisfaction, more joy, and more people to talk with, and that's been a lot of fun.
What are some of the sacrifices you've had to make in order to maintain your support group? Time.
This is literally a 7-day-a-week situation. I turn the computer on around 6:30 in the morning, and I'll process emails for an hour or two before breakfast, and then during the day the phone starts to ring and so on. And I have found that as much fun and joy and satisfaction as I get out of this, it has definitely impacted balance in my life. And I enjoy playing golf. I enjoy boating and other things, and reading and so on. And I have made some sacrifices in those areas. And I'm hoping now that my daughter is on board and helping me out, and we'll be able to move more toward doing some of those other things.
If we talked about obstacles, what were the obstacles, the challenges you have had to overcome, not only in writing the book, but also in continuing with your ministry?
Probably the biggest obstacle is time. When someone sends an email and they list 10 or 15 questions, I would love to be able to answer every one of them in detail. And I find myself not able to do that anymore, because if I were to do that, I would not be paying attention to a lot of other folks. So right now, the biggest obstacle, I think, is time. When it came to putting the book together, I'm a perfectionist by nature, and I wanted to make sure that the book was perfect before it went out. And each time I thought I was near done, I would think of something else. I would think of some new areas I should cover. And that delayed the book by a year or two initially. And then finally, a good friend of mine said, I think it's time. Put the book out now. Put out a second edition later. And so that was very helpful to me. And in retrospect, I'm glad I did it. I know there are areas that are incomplete and areas that I could develop further, and I will do that in the next edition. But I think those are probably the obstacles that most come to mind.
If someone wanted to get in contact with you or buy your book, where could they go to find you?
You can find the book through my website, which is www.protonbob.com. You can find it on lulu.com. You can find it on Amazon. And you can find it on the Borders website, Barnes & Noble, eBay, a number of places. It's not in bookstores, but it is available at many different places on the Internet. And if someone wants to contact me, they can send me an email at rmarckini@protonbob.com. They can send me an email directly to rmarckini@protonbob.com.
Okay, very last question here. If you could go back in time and give your younger self some advice, what would it be?
It's a difficult question to answer. I certainly had a very happy childhood. I had wonderful parents and siblings, and there's not a whole lot I think I would have changed in that regard. I think as I grew older, when I think about the disease that I was diagnosed with, I think there are certain things that I perhaps could have done to slow the progression of the disease, delay the onset of the disease in terms of diet and lifestyle. Perhaps eating less red meat and animal fats and dairy products. Of course, back in those days, we all believed that we needed more of those things in order for us to build our bodies and have the appropriate levels of protein and all that. I think I would have eaten more fresh fruits and vegetables, more of a whole food, plant-based diet, maybe pay a little bit more attention to body weight and fitness and exercise and those things. But there's not much I could have done to choose different parents, knowing that there's a genetic component here. But not a whole lot different. I'm very happy with the way things turned out, and I'm especially happy with this ministry that we have going right now.
One final question before we wrap this up, and this is it. What are your future aspirations for your book and your ministry? What do you want to see happen in the next 5-10 years?
Well, I would love to see more money funnel into proton therapy research. We spent a lot of time with our group raising money for research at Loma Linda University Medical Center, where they pioneered this technology. So far, our group has raised about $5 million, but we're trying to fund 20 research chairs at $5 million apiece. So that's $100 million, so we're far from that goal. I would like to do a lot more to promote prostate cancer awareness initially and proton therapy, not only for prostate cancer but for other diseases. There are many, many other diseases that this technology can treat, and there are many more that research will allow them to treat if it's properly funded. So I think it's about promoting awareness of prostate cancer, prevention of prostate cancer, promoting proton beam radiation therapy, preserving it, by the way, from those who would like to stop reimbursing for it through the insurers, through healthcare reform. There are some issues in that area that we're paying attention to. But I think those are the areas that I would like to see attention focused in the future.
Bob, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. This has been a really great interview. I really do invite you back to do future shows. I hope that we'll be able to get you on when the next edition of your book comes out.
That would be my pleasure, Frank. Thank you very much for having me.
This has been great. His name is Robert Marckini, and he is the author of the book, You Can Beat Prostate Cancer. Be sure to check that up on the internet. I'm Frank Kermit. Good night, everybody.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Pimping Your Pad Seminars. Decorating your bachelor apartment. Your home and the way you live is an extension of your sexuality. Frank will show you, with pictures of his own home, what women look for that identifies you as a potential partner. Frank looks at everything from theme rooms to furniture placement and space management to pets to the organization of your bathroom to get women to want to spend the night. The Pimping Your Pad Seminars and telephone consultations, only available at franktalks.com.
Frank Talks is sponsored in part by the program Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Frank brings good news to the older seducer, to women they possess higher value. Frank's lecture reviews the stigmas associated with older men dating younger women and their solutions. Key emotional needs for both women and men in the age difference. Methods of approaching younger women, and several answers to questions posed by older members of the audience. He also very much covered marriage between an older man and a younger woman. When dealing with a little girl inside, a man must be able to distinguish those women who wish to compensate losses in a father figure from those who are seeking and capable of an authentic relationship. Frank adds advice on where you can meet younger women, as well as dealing with the competition. Life gets better. All in all, a confidence-refreshing lecture for men concerned about their erotic viability over the hill. Dating Younger Women, a guide for older men to the emotional needs of loving younger women. Buy this program now at franktalks.com. Frank Talks is sponsored in part by Multiple Women Management, the 10 secret rules of a harem master. What are the written rules of multiple women management? How are the emotional needs of women addressed in a lifestyle that supports dating multiple women at the same time? Can love actually exist when dating many women at once? How does a man handle it when his lovers meet each other? What are the real risks of dating multiple women at the same time? Why does a man that wants multiple long-term partners need to be wary of the law? What is the Desperate Measures Act that even the most notorious player could use to get a woman to believe that he is ready for a serious long-term relationship? This program has those answers and more, including a brief overview of the difference between monogamy, polyamory, swinging, multiple women management, the 10 secret rules of a harem master. On sale now at franktalks.com.
If you need help with your relationships, my buddy Frank, he's got some tips. Just go to franktalks.com. His advice is better than your mom's. He knows what you're going through, Frank has been there too. So log on to franktalks.com. franktalks.com.
Need help with love, sex, dating, or relationship issues? Help from Frank Kermit, the best-selling author and Canada's most international relationship coach, is only a click away at franktalks.com. What do you do when you feel like a fool? When your heart has been broken again? Pick up the phone or get onto Skype and talk on a private session. Yeah, get a little help from Frank Talks. Whoa, whoa, get by with a little help from Frank Talks. You gotta try a little help from Frank Talks. up to turn things around. Just sign up at franktalks.com. Yeah, get by with help from Frank Talks. I get by with little help from Frank Talks. Time to try a little help from Frank Talks. Does it cost a lot of money? It's the best rate going around. Could it cost a lot of money? Oh, it's worth every cent that you will put down. Yeah. FrankTalks.com. Oh, you got to go to get your help from FrankTalks.com. Yeah, yeah. FrankTalks.com. Would you believe that Frank gets results? Yes, we're certain. Just read the reviews. Frank knows his stuff, and Frank's got the goods. Good love can soon